For anyone finding this video, you're probably finding it by virtue of Florida Maquis' recent work that he's done on this Earth grid patterning that he's uncovering probably over the last month or so. And you're undoubtedly familiar, I'm sure, with the pentagonal structures that he's been finding curiously in exact alignment with each other when you draw these straight lines and have perfect slices cut out of them. 10 to be exact, one from each side, one from each point of an angle from these pentagonal structures that he's finding. And to review, recently, last night, in fact, or early this morning, this is coming out Sunday, September 8th, he aligned some of these directly with the Holy See in the Vatican, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and that only adds to what we already have in Washington, D.C. with the United States military's Pentagon. And so I'd been thinking about making this video for a little while. Not having a presence on YouTube kind of prevents me from getting the motivation to do it, but after last night's video, I just had to get on here and not provide further points of interest, rather, but to attempt to explain what is happening. And so again, credit due where credit is owed, where Florida Maquis has very astutely found this Earth grid network. What I'm going to attempt to do is build on his research with an attempt to explain what is happening, rather than the why, which is not something I can speculate on, at least with the evidence that we have now. But with the comments from his video last night, this one to be exact, this is actually the video that I've referenced where he was finding the Temple Mount and the Vatican City. This is the Temple Mount with the line going directly through it, and let's see if we can find the Vatican one. Yep, here's the Vatican, just to prove that he's very, very close to establishing what probably in the next 2 months or so, a complete Earth grid network. So going back to this first photo, I want you guys to look at this for a second and notice that it does resemble something of a picture like this. And what this is a picture of is the Earth's ley line grids. I'm sure a lot of you are astute enough to probably have drawn the conclusion that what Florida Maquis is finding has to be related to the Earth grid ley line network in some sort of a way. The first thing I'll point out to you on this picture is you'll see larger both octagonal and pentagonal structures. And again, I'm going to go back to this and go back to the Temple Mount and show you that not only are we getting pentagonal structures, but now we're seeing the first octagon structure when this line's going through the Temple Mount. And I think both of these are related, because if you go back to these Earth grids, this is actually an exemplification of sacred geometry in nature. The logarithmic growth pattern that all nature takes on as time moves. So before we get into this topic entirely, I wanted to brief you with a meme. And I won't read the meme. You guys can read this on your own. It's got some profanity in it, but I think it's absolutely relevant, I guess I'll say, to what we're about to talk about. Because in order to get your mind wrapped around this isn't stuff that, of course, anybody teaches you in school, and most of the world's brightest scientists, mathematicians, you don't even learn about in the history books in school. And this, of course, is Nikola Tesla, where in the last few years he's been taken out of relative obscurity and into the mainstream just a bit, which is very good news. But as this meme indicates, open your mind a little bit, because those are the smartest among us that have figured some of this stuff out, have been pushed to the side, and it's going to require you to not be dumb in order to comprehend it. So this is another scientist individual who lived in the mid-20th century whose name is Buckminster Fuller. And just from this photo alone, you might actually be able to understand potentially where I'm headed with these concepts. And he was one that actually found scientific experiments to reaffirm that this Earth grid network, not only on Earth, but in all likelihood other planets out there and other objects in the universe as well, were to follow this same type of Earth grid alignment, layout, pattern, however you might want to call it. So one of his, I've actually got a book here. Before we go on any further, this book is this is found on Google Books. I'll link a lot of this stuff in the description below, just in case anybody wants to come to this. But this is an excerpt, one page from a book called Babylon's Banksters: The Alchemy of Deep Physics, High Finance, and Ancient Civilizations. And this is a book by Joseph Farrell. He's a contemporary author. You can find him on GizaDeathStar.com. Very prolific author. I have this book myself, but I did find this excerpt available publicly on Google, and he says it best, better than I could sum up what Buckminster Fuller's work was all about. And he states that the mention of Buckminster Fuller affords a significant clue into what might be going on with this Earth grid system. Of course, he's referencing another anecdote from earlier in the book when he's talking about Buckminster, but for our purposes, this works pretty well. Sorry about that. My alarm went out. Pardon the non-professional nature of that. Anyway, moving on. So he goes on to say, Joseph Farrell does, that is, in a series of unusual experiments, Fuller decided to test what sorts of wave patterns might emerge within spheres when subjected to acoustic stress, that is, when subjected to stress of longitudinal waves. Longitudinal waves is a concept that, if you really want to look into it, Konstantin Miles' work, Nikolai Kozyrev, Nikola Tesla, these guys all discuss what scalar waves or longitudinal waves are all about. Anyway, Fuller painted the surfaces of balloons, literally painted the surfaces of balloons, and I'll show you guys another experiment with balloons later in this video. He immersed them in water and then pulsed the water with sound waves of varying frequencies. Fuller discovered that as the spheres vibrated, they set up standing waves on the surfaces of the balloons, such that the paint would begin to collect and form lines and grid-like patterns on the surface. And guess what? The balloon had a structure just like the Earth does. When you pinpoint all these points out onto the balloon, what you'd end up finding out is that water would collect at these energy points, and it would form these grids. So there's something of a magnetic force going on, is what he discovered, and it mimics that of the toroidal field of the energy flow of a human body. For one, as you notice, there are a couple things going on here. There's of course a person in the middle, the chakra system, if you're not familiar with that, plus the electromagnetic aura or egg shape that we have, each human body has. But then there's also something that you're probably not as familiar with, and it's this shape here, this kind of this what's called a Merkaba, which is two tetrahedrons put together to form this kind of a star shape. And as this might look familiar to you, this is also the Star of David structure. And need I remind you that what we're discussing in this video now relates to the Temple Mount. So some of this symbolism is now coming out and matching up with potentially why it is that the, I guess I'll just call them secretive elites of the world, have arranged everything in this way. And to review, I think it has everything to do with placing significant structures, bases, encampments on these points to capture the energy. And then, as Florida Maquis has astutely suggested, maybe using other areas to hack into networks to form the basis of the Stargate networks that he's found. And in my opinion, in order to traverse a Stargate, you must place them on one of these points. It would only make sense to me anyway. For if a Stargate is to work, you must have incredibly accurate coordinates. And how much more accurate of a coordinate grid system can you get than this? So before we go into anything else, sorry, I keep saying before we go, I don't have as much polish as some other people might have. I'm going to take you back to this, because this is actually the structure that Buckminster Fuller devised from that Earth grid that I was talking about. And as you can see, we have both octagonal and pentagonal structures. And this is what's affectionately referred to as a buckyball. What's interesting about this is you've got these larger nodes, as you can see here, the much larger Earth grid networks, major points. They've got these pentagonal structures around them, octagonal in nature as well. But when you come back to the buckyball, you don't have quite as many lines. A lot simpler structure. But when you zoom in on what this is, let's see if I can do this here. Yeah. I don't know how the fidelity works out on YouTube, but you can see each node here is represented by its own buckyball formation. And as fractal patterns, if I was able to zoom in on this, smaller and smaller and smaller nodes would each have these pentagonal, octagonal structures to them. So nature is creating these buckyball formations, at least in a spherical concept. So spheres aren't necessarily exact spheres, of course, and I think a lot of people that would come to Florida Maquis channel might suspect this. But you might be able to also infer that one of the photos I had earlier, yeah, this one here, as we can go, as Florida Maquis also pointed out, these pentagonal structures, they're energetic anomalies. So each point here, whether it's rock, whether it's forest, whether it's sand, what he's done is he's found that at least there is either a lack of vegetation, there's a preponderance of vegetation, there's discoloration, there are any number of things that looks like there is what I would call an energetic anomaly at these points, and they're creating these shapes. Tying it all together again, I suspect there are energies coming out of these sacred points on the Earth, and the governments of the world know exactly where these are at, know how to find them, know that when they're emitting a certain type of energy, maybe they even, I might suspect and speculate that they know how to read certain types of energies that are being emitted from them. And right now is a particularly precarious period of time, because as we're about to discover, there's a whole line of science that I think is being hidden, and a lot of people have also come to the work of Nikola Tesla as of late. The free energy paradigm that he was attempting to create, all of the things that happened in the early 20th century that actually did not come to be. I suspect there's some more science that is locked up in all of this that I'm going to attempt to explain to people. And again, to keep an open mind about this is going to be key. So the point that drives this all home, now that we've got the backup of the Babylon's Bankster's book referring to Buckminster Fuller's work, the formation of the buckyball, which nature seems to mimic, and the allusion to this Merkaba structure, which was symbolism of the Star of David, I might bring you to, well, let me see if I have actually just one photo. I do have a photo of a Merkaba here. Here's a Merkaba. As you can see, this is a little bit easier to represent. There's the top or side or of one of the tetrahedrons, a four-sided sacred geometrical figure, three-dimensional in nature, of course, if you can visualize that. And now what I want you to do is visualize not a person in the middle of this energy field, but visualize this sphere as the Earth. And as you might be able to see, the Merkaba touches the points of this black sphere. Much like if you were to place a Merkaba in the middle of this spherical structure, the points, here are three of them here, and then if you can imagine on the fourth side of this, there would be the other point of that Merkaba, or actually tetrahedron, and then the inverse tetrahedron would go the other way and connect down here, and then two on the other side. So these are actually expansion points, is what a scientist by the name of Samuel Warren Kerry devised. And Samuel Warren Kerry is somebody who I'm going to wrap up this video by going into a little bit of his work with. And another great quote. to consider before we look at his work and tie this all together. Really new trials are rarely blazed in the great academies. The confining walls of conformist dogma are too dominating. To think originally, you must go forth into the wilderness. And that's exactly what he did. Samuel Warren Kerry was pretty famous for in the mid-century, in the 50s and such, creating a new theory for tectonics and going out into the New Guinea jungles and interfacing with the locals out there, figuring out what they knew, what their legends said, to tie into his research. And what he actually proposed was that the Earth tectonic model, as we actually learn in school today, was false. He kind of took the concept of Pangea that we all know, which is all of the continents puzzle pieced together, and took the water away and figured out something pretty remarkable. And it was that the Earth continental plates fit together more perfectly than anybody realizes. Not only do they fit together on this ridgeline, they fit together in a complete sphere if you were to take the water away. And what I mean by that is perhaps better illustrated in a diagram on Neil Adams' channel, who's actually a comic book artist for Batman comics. But I might just let this thing play. What we're going to be doing here is going through, this is a 200 million year regression animation that Neil has made. And of course there's audio on his video. I'll link this for you guys too so you can go watch it with the audio. But what's basically happening here is you're seeing these plates drift slower and slower together, and as the continents come together, what you're going to find is that the oceans slowly disappear, the puzzle pieces fit together, and pretty remarkably so, the Earth, as it is presumed by Samuel Warren Kerry and other scientists of the expanding Earth theory, have explained that in the time of the dinosaurs, we actually didn't have oceans. We had what were called shallow seas. And this is actually consistent even with a lot of the paleontological records that you'll find out there, and this actually solves for a lot of the enigmas of how dinosaurs would get from one continent to the other in these times. So I'll let you guys kind of play with that, but he goes through this video and kind of explains, of course, how the drift occurs, and then shows a couple of really great graphics that show the ridge lines in both the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. And I don't know about you guys, but to me, with as flat and even as each one of these panels are, and going back to this photo, as you can see these ridge lines, this of course is a drawing, a topographical map, an approximation taken from satellite data, but these look like stretch marks. You can't unsee it after you've seen it, right? These look like stretch marks where that very matter is being created. And I will perhaps do another video on how that matter is created. Actually, Cliff High, if anybody has come across his work, has explained this in the past, how the cosmic rays of the Earth interact with the plasma core of the cosmic rays of the Sun, and the cosmic rays of the galactic center, the solar wind. These things all combined right now in the grand solar minimum period to penetrate the Earth's surface, go directly to its plasma core, create the pressure inconsistency such that the new matter is formed. Most of the cosmic rays out there, we'll get into another video about that if anybody ends up attaching to any of this research. But as you can tell, I think I might actually leave it at that for now, just because this video is getting a little bit long. But suffice to say, as a review, there's something going on with the Earth's government, how they're able to find these areas, and exploit them. Again, not sure why they're doing it, but much like these UFO landings that leave these electromagnetic anomalies on the ground, this is the Rendlesham UFO landing incident in the UK. Here's a monument that actually, I guess, puts it in a memorial. This is an artist rendering statue, essentially, of what the craft that landed here looks like. But even to this day, there are these electromagnetic anomalies created around these so-called landing zones, a lot like the energetic anomalies here. And my only suggestion here is that the types of energies that the Earth emits and the types of energies that might be remnant from a craft are going to be similar in nature to cause these bald spots, discolorations, etc. But again, I leave it at